We are in the midst of this Gemara on page 9a and 9b. We turned the page yesterday. It was a little complicated, but the concept is not necessarily so complicated. It's more if you get into the details. But the what we were dealing with had to do with the exemption of a person who was a Chagiga lame on the first day of Yom Tov. Would he really be exempt from bringing the Korban Chagiga on the subsequent days of the holiday? The Gemara didn't seem to be so convinced that it should be that way. In other words, we saw Rabbi Yochanan said that, but then we found other statements of Rabbi Yochanan that didn't seem to go along with that. And the Gemara we learned yesterday mentioned a source from the laws of Nazir. At least that's the simple pshat that is talking about the laws of Nazir. There is another pshat, but it's if we want to just keep it more simple, the simple understanding, Rashi's way of understanding it, Tosfos' way of understanding it, is that we're talking about the laws of Nazir. And in the laws of Nazir, we have this a situation where a person who's not supposed to become tamei, he's a Nazir, somehow, I guess a mistake happened, or somehow he became tamei. But not only did he become tamei once, but then he became tamei a second time. And depending on when that second time is, there is a possibility that he will be able to bring one sacrifice for both of his transgressions, so to speak, or both of his impurity situation.
Omissions.
Okay. So he where both of his impurities, is he going to be able to get away with his with one set of sacrifices? So the situation that we were specifically talking about was that instead of bringing his sacrifices on the 8th day, which he was supposed to, but the night before that he became tamei a second time. So that's the real specific case that we're dealing with. If he was already on the 8th day and he became impure, then he definitely needs to bring 2 sets of sacrifices. But if we're dealing with an impurity that came on the night before, so it's the night before the 8th day. So on that, we had 2 opinions. We had the opinion of Chizkiah, who said, Balayla einoi mevi, if he becomes impure at night, the night before the 8th day. So this is his second impurity. And we're gonna and the Gemara says that Chizkiah holds he does not need to bring a separate set of sacrifices. Let me mute everyone. He doesn't need to bring a separate set of sacrifices. Instead, he can get away with one set of sacrifices. That's Chizkiah's view. Rabbi Yochanan argues. Rabbi Yochanan says that at night he can't bring the sacrifice for the first impurity, but if he becomes impure again, he is going to need to bring 2 sets of sacrifices. One we would call a tashlumin, a makeup for the first impurity. He can't bring it on the 8th day. He's supposed to bring it on the 8th day, but he'll make it up later. And the other one is a set of sacrifices for the second impurity, which will be, again, after he counts another 7 clean days, 7 days of purity, and gets sprinkled on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And he goes to the mikvah and he has a haircut, and he's going to be able to become pure again. but he needs to bring 2 sets of sacrifices. That's Rabbi Yochanan's view. Now, the logic behind Rabbi Yochanan's view seems to contradict the logic of Rabbi Yochanan here in our Gemara. Because Rabbi Yochanan here in our Gemara says that when you can't do something, you're exempt and you don't do a makeup for it. And the logic of that Gemara seems to follow a line of thinking that you can't do it, but you're supposed to. So you have some type of an obligation on you that you will have to, when the time comes, you'll have to do some type of a makeup for. And specifically, what we're talking about is you have an obligation to bring a set of sacrifices for your first impurity. It's the 8th day. It's the night before the 8th day. And you really have some type of an obligation already. And therefore, you should bring a sacrifice when you're able to. You'll bring a set of sacrifices for the first impurity as a tashlumin. You'll make up for the first impurity, and then you'll bring also for the second impurity. So that again, that seems to contradict. Again, this is a contradiction with the way we're dealing with the lame person and we're dealing with the impurity. Our Gemara is talking about someone who's lame, talking about exemption from bringing a Chagiga sacrifice. And we're saying if you're lame on the first day, you're totally exempt afterwards, no makeup. And over there, we're saying that you can't bring your sacrifices for your first impurity, but we're going to consider the second impurity a whole new impurity, and we're not going to combine it and say it's all one. We're going to say, no, your first impurity is over, even though you can't bring the sacrifices yet, but you're obligated, so to speak, to bring them, but you can't bring them, but you have that obligation on you. We're looking at that obligation and saying you do have an obligation on you to bring it, even though you can't bring it. And therefore, the second impurity is not going to connect and combine with the first impurity. So we're looking at you as someone who's really obligated in bringing sacrifices, even though you can't. While Rabbi Yochanan and our Gemara was saying, you're not obligated, you're exempt. You're lame, you're exempt. You're exempt from bringing because you can't bring it yet. You can't bring it, you're lame. So the Gemara's initial answer was that there's a difference between impurity and lame. When a person's impure, we look at it as you're really supposed to bring it. You're just impure. You sort of have an external limitation on you. And we see that with Korban Pesach, that when a person is not able to bring the Korban Pesach because he's impure, we give you a substitute. You make it up a month later. Yud Daled Iyar, month after the first sacrifice of Pesach, you do it a month later. However, when it comes to being lame, you're totally exempt, and we don't look at it as if you're obligated. We look at it as if you're completely exempt, and you have no connection to the sacrifice. Impurity, you're connected. You're just you're sort of like limited. You're tied down. Okay. The Gemara isn't happy with that because the Gemara says that there's 2 opinions about the Pesach Sheni and purity. And when it comes to, is that really considered a substitute or is it not really a substitute? With Pesach Sheni, there is a view that says it's really a holiday of its own. If you didn't bring it on the first Pesach, you would be obligated in bringing a sacrifice on the second Passover, even if you didn't bring it on the first Passover, let's say on purpose. Or even if you were exempt on the first Passover because you were a minor, or because you weren't Jewish during the first Passover, but you became Jewish afterwards. So there are numerous examples where this would apply. That we might consider the second Passover a holiday in its own right to some extent. And if it's a holiday in its own right to some extent, then we don't see this concept of impurity being looked at as an opportunity for doing a substitute, because it's not exactly a substitute. It's really a holiday. He's obligated because you're obligated. You're not obligated because you're doing a substitute. And when it comes to impurity or something, no, this is a holiday in its own right. and you have to bring a sacrifice on the second Passover. So according to that opinion, we don't see a precedent of impurity being different than being lame and having an exemption. The exemption of impurity we don't see as so much different. Yes, Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to say, wasn't impurity one of the reasons that you wouldn't participate in Pesach and you would try to go on the second Pesach?
So that's true. But when you do the second Pesach, are we looking at it as a substitute for the first? Or are we looking at it as an alternative to the first? If you look at it as a substitute to the first, then we sort of have a precedent that when it comes to impurity, we concentrate on we say there is a concept of substitution. But if we look at it more as an alternative, and whoever didn't, for whatever reason you didn't do the first, you will be obligated in the second. We look at it as a holiday in its own right. Then we don't have a precedent of this concept of having a substitute because of impurity. You're obligated because you're obligated in the second Passover, not as a substitute, as an alternative. You brought on the first, great. If you didn't bring it on the first, now is a holiday for you. This is a holiday for you to bring it. It's not a substitute holiday. It's an actual holiday. And that's why a person who was a minor on the first Pesach would be obligated and bring it on the second Pesach. Because he's not obligated in a substitute. He's obligated because it's an entity in its own right. It's a holiday in its own right. It's an alternative holiday. So that's the reason why the Gemara is not satisfied with this answer. And the conclusion of the Gemara, which seemed very smooth, is that there is a difference between the fact that it's night and the fact that someone is lame. That was the conclusion. That the night before the 8th day, when a person is impure, he's a Nazir, he messed up his Nazirus, he was supposed to count 30 days of being a Nazirite, and he messed up in the middle. He became impure with a dead body, either in the same tent as a dead body, touched a dead body, carried a dead body, whatever it is. He is impure. He's got to do a 7-day purification process. And then on the 8th day, he's got to bring the sacrifices. That person, on the night before the 8th day, before he brought the sacrifices, he became impure a second time. That guy, he's really obligated in bringing sacrifices at night, just that he can't bring them at night. There is a limitation on him, but it's an external problem. He can't bring them yet, but he's obligated to bring. The obligation kicked in already. And that guy is called an individual that has an obligation of bringing these sacrifices on him. And then he became impure a second time. And now he's going to get a new obligation of bringing sacrifices on him because of his second impurity. But the first obligation is an obligation that already is on his shoulders. However, night is a limitation. It's not mechusar zman. It's not you're not called a primi. You're not exempt from it. You're limited. You can't bring it, but you're not a mechusar zman. You're not a premature individual. The obligation is there. You just can't bring them. It's at night. Night we don't bring sacrifices. They burn some of the stuff that wasn't burned at night, but they don't actually bring sacrifices at night. And this person would be considered that he's obligated to bring those sacrifices already. And then when he becomes impure a second time that night, he actually has a new obligation of bringing a new set of sacrifices. However, in the case of lame on the first day of Sukkot, or the first day of Pesach, the first day of Shavuos, if he becomes lame, he would be totally exempt from doing a makeup, because there he never had an obligation on him in the first place. Now, that sounds very nice. It sounds very good. However, we are now going to be stuck dealing with another statement of Rabbi Yochanan that doesn't seem to fit with this. The main point that we're concentrating on now is that Laila, night, is not called mechusar zman, premature, missing time. At night, we don't consider it a non-obligatory moment yet. We consider it, no, you are obligated already. You just have your hands are tied, you can't actually bring the sacrifice, but the obligation is on your shoulders. That's how we look at night, the night situation. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not a contradiction. If a person is lame on the first day of Sukkot, he's going to be exempt from doing a makeup of a korban chagiga. He does not have to bring a korban chagiga as a substitute later on. According to Rabbi Yochanan, he's exempt because he was exempt on the day that he's supposed to be obligated. He was totally exempt. He's lame, free to go. However, if a person was a nazir, became impure, and then he did all the purification process, in the night before he's supposed to bring his sacrifices, the night before the 8th day, he becomes impure a second time, that guy will tell him, you have an obligation for the first impurity, and you have a new obligation of sacrifices for your second impurity. Him, we're going to tell that. It's not a contradiction, because night is not a premature time. Night is obligatory time. You're obligated in your first sacrifices. It's not like you're still impure. It's not like you haven't completed your purification process. Your obligation of sacrifices have fallen upon your shoulders, and you'll have to bring a first set for that, for first impurity. Even though you can't bring it now, your obligation is already there because we're dealing with night. Night is different than lane. Okay. So now that we have that pretty clear, that night is you're obligated, you just can't do it. The Gemara now has a question of how do we reconcile the laws of Ziva. Ziva is a tractate actually in the Mishnayos called Zavim. What is a Zav? A Zav is a person, a man. I think in English they translate it as gonorrhea, a certain emission that he has. And the Gemara tells us that it's different than semen. Semen is more thicker liquid substance, and Zav is an emission that's more runny. And it's the terminology in the Gemara, even though I'm not really sure what it means, but the terminology in the Gemara is that the consistency of the Zav, of the emission, is similar to water of barley dough. Now, I don't know if anyone ever made barley bread, so I don't know what water of barley dough is, but that's what the Gemara says. And it mentions that this discharge comes out from when the organ is limp, it's not having an erection, and it's runny, and it resembles the white of a spoiled egg, while semen is viscous and resembles the stark white of an unspoiled egg. So that's some type of a discharge that a person has, and I think that they claim that it's the same thing as gonorrhea, which is some type of a sickness that I'm told people who are on the ships for long times, they sometimes get that. I don't know exactly why that is, but anyway, that is what Zav is. Now, what does that have to do with Jewish law? Well, in the Torah, it talks about very few, but there are a few cases that have halachic connections. One of them, we know tsaras is like some type of a leprosy, which has many halachic ramifications and laws. In the law, which is a whole tractate of Negoyim. And we have laws of this Zav, which there's a whole tractate about. And in short, the laws of Zav is that a person who sees this discharge once, it's considered the same as a wet dream, which means he would go to mikvah and wait for the sun to set and wait for the night to come, and then he would be totally free, totally pure. That would be one discharge. If he has two discharges, either on the same day or on 2 consecutive days, then he would have to count a period of 7 clean days that he has no discharge. And then he would be, then go to mikvah and wait for the night, and he would be pure. However, if he has 3 discharges, either on the same day, 2 days, or 3 days, he would have to bring a set of sacrifices, and on the eighth day, very similar to the Nazir who was impure. He had to bring a set of sacrifices on the 8th day. The Zav has the same thing. He wants to do a service in the temple or eat holies or whatever, so he's got to purify himself, and the way he would purify himself would be to wait till do this purification 7 days of not having any discharge, and which would be like 7 clean days, and then he would go to mikvah, and then he would bring on the next day, on the 8th day, he would bring the sacrifices. Now we could look into that case and see that there's a very similar issue that could happen with the Zav as we found with the Nazir. What's the similar issue? Well, what happens if the Zav does his 7 clean days? He's no discharge during those 7 days. And then the night, then the night before he's going to bring the sacrifices, he sees a discharge. So would he be able to get away with 1 set of sacrifices after he counts another, 7 clean days? Can he get away with, he saw 3 discharges, obviously, right? In order to bring another set of sacrifices, but would he be obligated to bring a second set of sacrifices? Because maybe it's all considered one long period of Zav or Zivos. And that's what the Gemara is dealing with. And we have an opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that doesn't seem to fit with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan that we just mentioned in the laws of Nazir. So the Gemara, and we're on page 9b, and we're going to start fourth line down from the top of the page. Umi Amar Rabbi Yochanan Hachi. Does Rabbi Yochanan really say that night is not a time, is not an issue, I should say, that night is not an issue with bringing sacrifices and calling the person premature to bring his sacrifices? Does Rabbi Yochanan really say that? Does Rabbi Yochanan really say that night, theoretically, you're obligated in bringing the sacrifices, you just have an external limitation? Does Rabbi Yochanan really hold that night is not an issue? And really, we look at you as you're obligated in bringing sacrifices. V'hama Rabbi Yochanan, doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say regarding the laws of Zav that Ra'ah Achas, if the Zav sees one discharge of Zav, Balayla, on the night before the 8th day, in other words, before he's supposed to bring his sacrifices, and then he sees Ushtayim Bayoim, and then he sees the next two, another two discharges, Bayoim on the day, on the 8th day. So he saw one at night, and then he sees another two. So the law is maybe he has to bring, when he becomes purified, after counting another 7 clean days, he becomes pure, and he brings another set of sacrifices. And Shtayim Balayla, but what happens if he sees 2 discharges at night? V'achas Bayoim, and then he sees a third one on the 8th day. Einoi Mevi, he does not have to bring a new set, a second set of sacrifices for the second impurity. Why? Because he already has the law of a Zav, a full-fledged Zav. Again, if he sees once, it's not really the law of a full-fledged Zav. When he sees one discharge, it's really considered like a Baal Keri, which we learned in Tractate Brachos. A person who has a wet dream or has relations, that is not considered a Zav. He's considered more like a Baal Keri, more like someone who had relations or someone who had a wet dream. He's not considered a regular Zav. He doesn't have to count 7 days and so on. It doesn't fall into the real category of Zav. But when you see twice, then he falls into the category of Zav. Now, if he doesn't see a third time, he might not have to bring sacrifices. But if he sees twice, he will still have to count the 7 clean days. So Rabbi Yochanan says that, and it's a technical situation here, where if he sees once at night and 2 during the day, so he's going to, Rabbi Yochanan says he's going to have to bring 2 sets of sacrifice. But if he sees twice at night, 2 discharges the night before the 8th day, Rabbi Yochanan says, you know what? Einoi Mevi, you're exempt. You don't have to bring a second set of sacrifices. Now, this seems to be a clear contradiction to his previous opinion. Because let's compare the 2 cases. We have the case of a Nazir. The Nazir became impure at night. And what did Rabbi Yochanan say? That when the Nazir became impure at night, Alayla Nami maybe. When the Nazir became impure at night, we say, you got to bring a set of sacrifices for the previous impurity. You got to bring a set of sacrifices for the future impurity. It's at night. And we said, you know why? Because you're really obligated to bring in your original obligation of sacrifices now at night, even though you can't bring it, but you're obligated. Because night isn't really an exemption. You're not really a preemie. You're really obligated. That's what we said by Nazir. And then we jump to the law of Zav, and we say, oh, you saw twice at night. You're still a Zav from the first time. You don't have to bring a second set. Because you're really still a Zav. What do you mean I'm still a Zav? It's night. In the night, I'm really obligated already and bring my sacrifices for the first Zav. And if I'm obligated and bring the sacrifices for the first Zav and I see a second time, I should have to bring double. And what does Rabbi Yochanan say? He doesn't have to bring a second time. So by Nazir, we said you gotta bring a second set of sacrifices when you became impure at night. And by Zav, you saw twice at night. We say, nah, you're still the same Zav from before. So how do we reconcile this contradiction between Nazir and between Zav? That's the question. Now, if you're not able to follow, if you weren't able to follow till here, don't worry. We're just about finished this Gemara. It's just a little longer, and we're going to be done. So it seems complicated. I know in yeshiva, most of the students never liked the laws of impurity. Purity and impurity was always put everyone to sleep because we don't know how to relate to it nowadays because it's not so applicable. So I understand if it's not as interesting as the other Gemaras. Yes, Ben.
I wonder if gonorrhea is transferable, somehow. That's why they catch it on the ship. But what if somebody has it at third time or fourth time?
Just one second. I can't hear you. What if someone has what?
A third time.
A turn time?
It continues. After the second time, he's still not clear. He still gets ziva for third time,
Yeah, so then he's obligated in bringing sacrifices. Yeah, he would continue being out. He would continue being tamei, and
would he bring just one, or would he bring 3, 4?
Wait, isn't there a story in
for him to heal?
Isn't that the story of Gehazi? Wasn't he impure with Zav? Rechavam? I have to look it up, but there's stories in the Tanakh about people who were Zavs. They stayed tamei, they stayed impure. That's it.
Oh, okay. So they never bring a sacrifice.
Well, if they never get pure, yeah. I mean, that's sad, but yeah,
Yeah. Okay, that's what I wondered, why they stop at 2.
Well, this is a story. 2 obligates you to count 7 clean days. 3, you're obligated in bringing a sacrifice.
That's okay. I just wondered if it was considered.
Now, Gehazi was impure with Saras, but I think it says Rechavam had does it say Rechavam was a Zav? I'm not.
Gehazi was the helper of Elijah, right?
What is that?
Is that the Gehazi you're talking about?
No, he had Saras.
Assistant to Elijah?
Yeah, to Elisha. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So the bottom line is, if a person was a Zav for a long time, they would be tamei for that long.
Okay.
Okay. The Gemara here says, so now we have this contradiction. So the Gemara answers, before the Gemara answers, it says, it develops the question a little more. The Isal Kadaitoch, and if it goes up in your mind, because Saba Rabbi Yochanan, that Rabbi Yochanan holds Laila Einay Mechusar Zman, that night is not a premature time, and really the obligation kicks in at night. Even if a person saw 2 discharges at night and he sees a third one by day, the next day, maybe he should really have to bring a second set of sacrifices for being a zav a second time. We should look at it as two separate zavs. He's a zav for the first one. Okay, he finished because the night he's already obligated in bringing a set of sacrifices, and now a new set kicks in, a new zav kicks in because he saw a discharge twice, which obligates him in counting another 7 clean days. And of course, he saw the third time the next day, which obligates him in bringing a new set of sacrifices. So the Gemara answers, Ki ka'amar Rabbi Yochanan l'divrei ha'omer. When did Rabbi Yochanan say this law? He's following a certain opinion. According to the opinion of Laila Mechusar Zman, that night is called premature, and that follows that opinion. Really, he himself doesn't necessarily hold that way. He himself holds like he holds in the laws of Nazirus, in the laws of the Nazirite, which he clearly says over there, that night is not called a premi, and you would be obligated in 2 sets of sacrifices for the Nazir who became impure twice. But the Zav, he's talking in the view that night is called premature, and therefore you're really not yet obligated in the first set of sacrifices of Zav, and therefore you got Zav a second time. That Zav a second time is really called the first time because you were premature in your obligation of bringing the first set of Zav. You're really still a Zav from the first time around. You never had the obligation to bring sacrifices, and now the second Zav kicked in. It's really part of the first Zav. And that's as Ben mentioned, that if you're still a Zav, you never end up bringing it. You never got rid of the Zav. And so that is following that view that Laila is Mechusar Zman, night is considered premature. But the Gemara says that sounds good, and that's a good answer, except that if you follow that view, then it doesn't seem to be teaching us much. That seems quite obvious then. Then his law seems as if it's so obvious, he shouldn't even say it. If he was saying his law following the other way of thinking, then it's sort of like something innovative. It's something surprising. So he's telling us something that we would not have known. But if he's following the view that night is called premature, if he's following that view, then why does he have to tell us that if you saw Zav once and you saw Zav a second time before the day came, you have to you only bring one set? Of course you only bring one set. We're following the view that night is called premature. If night is called premature, then it's obvious you only bring one set of sacrifices. So the Gemara wants to know, how can you explain Rabbi Yochanan according to this view, and saying he's explaining that view? Because if he's explaining that view, he doesn't have to tell us this law. This law would be superfluous. It would be obvious. So the Gemara answers, the Gemara asks, L'divrei ha'omer shita, according to the opinion that night is premature, this is obvious. And the Gemara answers, Shtayim bayoim b'yachas balayla itzrichole. It needs to tell you this unique case. If you saw 2 at night and 1 by day, you're right, it is obvious. You saw 2 discharges at night, you saw 1 by day, yeah, that's pretty obvious. You're not going to need to bring a new set of sacrifices. You're right, that's obvious. But the other case is what it says it for, really emphasizes Rabbi Yochanan is saying his statement to emphasize the other part of his statement. And what's the other part of his statement? That he saw twice by day, and he only saw once the night before. And that's where you're letting us hear that this is a special law, and that's why he said this whole statement. But again, Rabbi Yochanan himself doesn't really follow this line of thinking. Rabbi Yochanan is saying this whole statement according to the opinion that night is similar to chiger, and it's all considered premature. Just like a person who's lame is premature, he's not ready to be obligated in his obligation of Chagiga. Also, night is premature. According to this way of thinking, that night would be premature, is not ready yet to bring the sacrifice of Zav. So this really is the end of this complicated cases of the laws of Tumah and Tahara, purity and impurity. And now we jump back to maybe the lighter elements of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah had mentioned that if a person missed out on the holiday sacrifice, the Chagiga, he didn't bring it even on the substitute days of the holiday, he would not be obligated in doing a makeup. And the verse that we brought was this verse in Ecclesiastes, Mu'uvas lo yuchal liskoin v'chesren lo yuchal lehimonois, that you did something that there's no makeup for. You lost out. There is no makeup for this. Once you missed the holiday, it's too late. Now, an interesting question that the commentaries deal with is, we said that there is a makeup on Sukkot, on Shmini Atzeres, right? That you could make up.
Yes.
If you missed on Sukkot, you could make up on Shmini Atzeres. What happens if you were a chiger, you were lame the whole Sukkot, and you became healed on Shmini Atzeres? Would you be obligated in bringing the sacrifice on Shmini Atzeres? I mentioned yesterday that Tosfos has an interesting question, interesting point he makes about Shavuos. If a person was lame on Shavuos, and then he becomes
still have 7
healed.
days on Shavuos.
Shavuos does have 7 days, as the Gemara later on will mention, that Shavuos does have 7 makeups. If a person missed out on Shavuos, you have 7 makeups. But what happens if a person was not obligated at all on Shavuos because he was a chiger, he was lame? After Shavuos, he gets healed. Would he be obligated in bringing the Chagiga sacrifice? So Tosfos is on this page over here mentions that it's not logical to say that he would be obligated in bringing a sacrifice after Shavuos when he becomes obligated. Why? The whole logic, Rabbi Yochanan, let's think about it. A person was not obligated on Shavuos because he was lame. After Shavuos is over, he now gets healed. So we have to think. There was an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shaya. Rabbi Yochanan said all the days are considered substitutes for the first day. If a guy was exempt on the first day of Shavuos, would he be obligated in bringing a sacrifice on the other 7 days after Shavuos? Would he be exempt or obligated? Again, he was exempt on the first day. What would Rabbi Yochanan? Let's think. Rabbi Yochanan would hold, if you're exempt on the first day, would you be obligated in doing a makeup afterwards? What does Rabbi Yochanan hold? Anyone?
If something is broken,
if you're exempt, the first day of Sukkot, the first day of Sukkot, you're exempt. Do you have to do a makeup afterwards? No, there's no makeup. If you were obligated, then you do a makeup. If you're exempt, there's no makeup necessary. That was Rabbi Yochanan's view. Rabbi Shaya said, well, you were exempt on the first day of Sukkot, let's say, because you were lame. Then the second day of Sukkot, you got better. So Rabbi Shaya says, well, what happens is the second day of Sukkot, you become obligated in bringing it because they're all called tashlumin to whatever day you're able to bring it. The subsequent days are called the makeups for that day that you're obligated. Rabbi Yochanan says only the first day you're obligated. Rabbi Shaya says all the days you have a certain obligation. Whatever day is first that you're able to do it, you're obligated. So Rabbi Shaya puts that obligation not only on the first day, but any day that you become obligated.
Unknown caller.
Rabbi Shaya says, whatever day you become obligated, Rabbi Shaya says you're obligated on that day. And the days afterwards are all makeups for whatever day is the first day you're obligated. That was Rabbi Shaya's view. So Rabbi Yochanan would hold you were exempt, let's say Shavuos. The first day of Shavuos, you were lame. After Shavuos is over, you got healed. What would Rabbi Yochanan say? You have to bring a Chagiga if you're exempt on the first day. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no, there's no substitute for someone who's exempt. You don't have to do a makeup for someone who's exempt. If you're exempt, there's no makeup necessary. That's Rabbi Yochanan. We have to know this clear. And this is the main argument over here in this whole page, is this argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shaya. So I think we really have to just go over this once more. Again, Rabbi Yochanan holds that the first day of the holiday is the obligation day. All the subsequent days are makeups for that first day of the holiday. What does Rabbi Shaya hold? Rabbi Shaya holds that any day of the holiday that you're able to bring it, that is your obligatory day. Whatever day is first. If you were lame the first day and the second day you're able to bring it, that second day is an obligatory day. And any subsequent days are all makeups for whatever day you were obligated to bring it. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's only the first day that you're ever obligated and all subsequent days are makeups. Rabbi Shaya says any day could be the obligatory day. It doesn't have to be the first. Whatever day is your first your first day that you're able to bring it, that's your obligatory day. And the other days will be makeups for that day. That's the difference between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shaya. What's the case where they would argue? The case where they would argue is if a person is lame on the first day. According to Rabbi Yochanan, there is no need to do any makeup because you were exempt on the first day. You don't have to make up if you were exempt. Rabbi Shaya says you weren't exempt fully. You were exempt on the first day, but the second day your obligation kicked in because you were able to come. You were not lame anymore on the second day. So Rabbi Shaya says the second day becomes your obligatory day. And the third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, and afterwards, they are makeup days. So the second day you're obligated. So if you were lame on the first day, are you obligated to bring it? Yes, you're obligated on the second day. And the third day, if you didn't bring it on the second day, you do makeup on the third day or the fourth day. You do a makeup. So Rabbi Shaya would say you're obligated. Rabbi Yochanan says you're exempt, right? That was the case, the simple case of our Gemara. And now we have it clear. Rabbi Yochanan is very lenient. Rabbi Shaya is strict. Rabbi Yochanan says you're exempt the first day, no makeup necessary. Rabbi Shaya says you're exempt the first day maybe, but the second day you're obligated. And then the third day you have to do a makeup for the second day if you didn't do it on the second day. So Rabbi Shaya is more strict, Rabbi Yochanan is more lenient. Now what happens on Shavuos? Shavuos, it's only a one-day holiday. However, the Gemara says that just like the other days, the other holidays have a makeup option, Shavuos also has a makeup option. Okay, now that sounds very good. And if you miss out on Shavuos, in the regular scenario, person was busy, I woke up late, whatever happened on Shavuos, slept in, whatever, he can do a makeup, no problem. You can do a makeup. That's the halacha, and that would apply to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. The Gemara says that Shavuos is just like the other holiday. I want to agree. You do a makeup. But what happens if you couldn't bring it on the first day of Shavuos? So now we're switching the case. Shavuos has makeups. But what happens if you were exempt on the first day? if you were exempt on the first day of Shavuos. So now we got to jump back to the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. What would Rabbi Yochanan say if you were exempt on the first day of Shavuos? Do you have to do a makeup? You were exempt on the first day. Do you have to do a makeup? Anyone? No makeup necessary.
No.
No makeup necessary. You're exempt. What would Rabbi Shaya say? So logically, he would say, yes, the second day, the day after Shavuos, you become obligated. What happens if you were lame 2 days? So the third day, which would be 2 days after Shavuos, you would all of a sudden, it would kick in an obligation to bring the sacrifice. Guess what Tosfos over here says? Tosfos over here says, doesn't seem to make sense. Are you going to bring a chagiga? You were exempt on the holiday. Are you going to really be obligated now on 2 days after Shavuos? Chagiga, I got to bring a holiday sacrifice. Oh, really? You were exempt on Shavuos. Rabbi Shaya is really going to say, I understand Rabbi Shaya's law on Sukkot. I understand Rabbi Shaya's law, Tosfos says, on Pesach. No problem. It's the third day of Pesach. I'm not lame anymore. Rabbi Shaya says, guess what kicked in? Your obligation to bring a chagiga, holiday sacrifice. Third day of Pesach, bring your holiday. This is my holiday. What about Shavuos? We're 2 days after Shavuos. All of a sudden, I'm going to bring a holiday? Oh, holiday sacrifice kicked in. If I was healthy the whole time, I could do a makeup. Okay, it's after Shavuos. Holiday sacrifice, makeup. That I get. Makeup sacrifice. Okay, God allowed me to do a makeup. But how about the initial obligation? Rabbi Shaya says your initial obligation can kick in on the third day of the holiday. If the first 2 days you were lame, on the third day of the holiday can kick in, right? So 2 days after Shavuos, I become healthy. I can walk again. I'm not lame anymore. Will the holiday obligation kick in then? Am I going to say, holiday sacrifice? Oh, this is my... if it was a makeup, I would get. But Tosfos says, this is a holiday sacrifice? No. It's loy mistaber l'meimar. It doesn't make sense to say that you're going to be obligated to bring a sacrifice then. So Tosfos tells us a huge insight over here that according to Rabbi Shaya, he agrees with Rabbi Yochanan on Shavuos. He doesn't hold of his law on Shavuos. He only holds of his law on Pesach and Sukkot. He doesn't hold of his law on Shavuos. He agrees with Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Shaya agrees with Rabbi Yochanan when it comes to Shavuos. It's a huge insight of Tosfos. And now the commentaries want to take a similar stand when it comes to Shmini Atzeres. Let's say a person was lame for the first 7 days of Sukkot. 7 days of Sukkot, they were lame. So what are you going to tell them? No problem, no problem. You know, you were lame, you were exempt. 7th day, I'm still lame, I'm exempt. 8th day kicks in, and what do we tell them? Rabbi Shaya, you got to bring your holiday sacrifice. This is my Sukkot sacrifice. Sukkot sacrifice? It's not Sukkot anymore. It's over. Sukkot is over. Oh, I could do a makeup? Shmini Atzeres is good for a makeup. It's not good for an obligation. I'm not going to be obligated. So some of the commentaries want to say that according to Rabbi Shaya, you would not be obligated in bringing a sacrifice if you were lame the first 7 days. Shmini Atzeres works as a makeup. It's not going to work as an obligatory day of, in other words, the Gemara included from a Gzeira Shava, just like Atzeres here works. There's a makeup of Atzeres. There's a makeup of Shmini of Shvi Shal Pesach. So there's a makeup of Shmini Atzeres. Okay, fine. I can do a makeup. That's what the Gemara understands to include, that you could do a makeup of Shmini Atzeres. But are you going to tell me that Shmini Atzeres would be able to have the initial obligation in it? That we don't necessarily learn from that. You can't really learn from that Gzeira Shava that it would carry with it the obligation element of the of that Rabbi Shaya holds of. It teaches us that there's a makeup element to it. The makeup is possible. The makeup, it tells us there's a makeup, but to say that it would carry with it the obligation of that holiday, that would be not what Rabbi Shaya is saying. So therefore, the concept of Tosfos regarding Shavuos would seemingly apply to Shmini Atzeres as well. Okay, well, I guess that's that touches upon this discussion here of missing out on the sacrifice, and we call it a mu'uvas lo yuchal liskoin. And the Gemara here on page 9b, which is the Gemara that we're just about to begin, it now talks about a story of an argument between Bar Hehe and the way the Mishnah explained mu'uvas lo yuchal liskoin. So Bar Hehe, who Tosfos tells us is probably a ger, because why is he called Bar Hehe? Bar Hehe means the letter He. Bar Hehe is the son of Avraham and the son of Sarah. Avraham had a He added to his name, and Sarah had a He added to her name. So it's telling us that this Bar Hehe was a ger, and that was the name that he went by. And Tosfos also mentions Ben Bagbag was the same story, because Beis and Gimel, 2 and 3 equal He, equal the letter He. And so therefore Ben Bagbag, who possibly was the same person, was the same story. And Bar Hehe mentions over here to Hillel, and the question is, it could be that this is the famous ger that was the one who asked Hillel to tell him the whole Torah on one foot. We know that there was the story in the Gemara in Shabbos where a ger went to Shammai, and Shammai kicked him out. Went to Hillel, and he said, teach me the whole Torah on one foot. And Hillel told him that what you don't like, don't do to your friend. And that's the whole Torah. And anyway, so this ger, Bar Hehe, he told Hillel that the wording of this verse in Ecclesiastes seems to include a different type of case than we learned. Our Mishnah learned it's talking about someone who missed out and bring a sacrifice. But Bar Hehe says that the word lehimanais doesn't seem to include that. Lehimanais seems to emphasize a case where there's a whole group of people learning or doing some mitzvah, and you're not counted with them. Well, to be continued in Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow. Okay, Zai Gesund, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.